Yes, the game was just okay. I wonder what you would say about Seattle as a champion. It was New England that got ripped kind of for just not having a tougher road, the easy schedule during the season, and then what the playoff run was like for the Patriots. I mean, the Seahawks had a much tougher deal in the NFC West and in the playoffs, but they also had the bye week. And then in the Super Bowl, they just did not get much resistance there. So where do you end up on how to sort of where you file the Seahawks?
I think a lot of people would classify me as a hater with this, but I would just say, listen, I think Seattle is the best team this year. I think they're the right champion. I think they're a deserving champion. I also think a lot of us spent much of this year correctly saying it's a down year in the NFL. There are just not a lot of good football teams. I mean, you kind of one hand, I think, how many teams you looked at this year and truly felt like that's a good team. I mean, a lot of people thought going into the playoffs, well, maybe the Texans will get there. I mean, the Texans have a quarter of an offense, right? And people were sitting there like, maybe that team's the best team in football. So, look, Seattle, to their credit, they ran through the Niners. They survived the Rams, who I think were the other really good team in the league. And then they smoked New England. But I've seen people say, well, with analytics, that they were one of the best teams of all time. Like, there's no way. I mean, I don't think. I think they were a very good team. I don't think they're an all-time great team as far as Super Bowl champions go.
Where do you think New England goes from here? Like, are you down on – because it wasn't just the Super Bowl. I mean, the playoffs overall, like I've said it this way, I don't know that a team has ever done less playing 3 games and getting to the Super Bowl than New England did on offense. I mean,
right.
Credit to their defense, but holy cow. I mean, Stroud just couldn't stop giving them the ball. The Chargers looked terrified the minute they stepped on the field. And then Denver's a blizzard and it's Jarrett Stidham. I mean, holy cow, talk about it falling right.
Yeah, no, and that's true. I mean, look, the Chargers, it's a time-honored tradition for the Chargers to get to the playoffs and just immediately forget how to play the sport. And then the Texans, they showed up to New England with half a football team and play like it. And as you point out, Denver, yeah, listen, I mean, Denver was, I think, a decent team. But, look, we all had this conversation about Denver, too. Like, Denver was one of the weakest one seeds that anybody could remember. I mean, when that game opened on some books, not all, but in some books, the Bills were favored over them before the line switched over. I think if that line had held, if Denver had been the underdog, they would have been the second underdog in history as a 1 seed coming off of a bye week. So it was a weird year. It was a weird year. And I think a lot of people are going to make these assumptions now that, well, things are different. You don't need to have that great quarterback. You can win with a bunch of different ways, and I would tell people to hit the brakes on that. Look, that historically is not true. That is an outlier thing. We saw it with Nick Foles years ago. If you want to go way back, like the 91 Washington team that won by 17 points a game. Statistically, it's one of those dominant teams in the league. And I would point at that team and say, okay, that team that year was awesome. They also beat the Falcons in the playoffs with Chris Miller, and they beat the Lions with absolutely nobody on it outside of Barry Sanders, and won the Super Bowl. And you're just going to get listen. Like they were great for 1 year. How'd that work out? Like did they end up sustaining that? It's very hard. I would suspect that a lot of teams next year that have the great quarterbacks will bounce back. They'll be where they're supposed to be. But this year was a weird year.
I'll take this opportunity since we have you, Matt, and you brought up that 91 Washington team to tell you that, and this isn't to contradict what you said at all, when I got to know Steve Tasker pretty well working in media, he said to me once that they were the losers in the Super Bowl to Washington, the Bills.
Right.
And he said that was the best team I've ever seen. And I had a tough time with that. For a long time, I had a tough time with that. Like,
Mark Rippon is the quarterback of the best team you've ever seen.
Yeah, but he was on the field. Like I always wanted to respect Steve's position on that, but then I came to just accept it because, like as you say, there are seasons where it's just. I mean, they had stars, that Washington team,
they did.
And maybe the Seattle defense is also that. We just don't know. They're not household names yet. So I just thought you'd like that.
No, it's true. And I heard Steve say that he said that on the Four Falls of Buffalo. And it's funny because they interview other players for that same thing. They're like, yeah, that was the one team. We were sure we were going to beat them. And it's just, I think to your point, though, and it is, I think two things can be true at once. Like, that team wasn't sustainable, right? Because Mark Rippon wasn't going to sustain, 10 years of excellence. But for 1 year, they were just awesome. And I think that's the thing with the Seattle team. Listen, Darnold led the league in turnovers. He had a good year, and he was a great story. And it's a wonderful thing for him. And I think it's awesome they won, and that he gets that moment.
Yeah.
And it's just further proof what a tire fire the Jets are, right? But, at the same point, I also just think, it's one of those things where people are going to take that lesson and go with the free agency and say, hey, you know what? We can win the Super Bowl with the 15th best quarterback. It's once in a decade. Once in a decade, you can do that. But, if you look at that Washington team, who won it after that? Aikman twice, and Favre, and Elway, and Warner. It's very hard to sustain that. But Seattle, to their credit, they were able to put it together, and they had a great run.
With Matt Verderame, SI.com, the Matt Verderame show on Patreon. I know that you've got a recent tweet about free agency and the draft, which is coming up, and hopefully we'll get to some of that before our time runs out. The point you're making, the overall point about this year being different, I think it starts with Kansas City and Patrick Mahomes. I mean, Philadelphia still was good and made a run, but the Chiefs' fall from grace was, obvious and pretty stark. How different were they from the year before? Their record is tremendously different, but they had all the close game luck in the first year and then none of it last year. And I wonder what you think going forward, because here, I don't know, yesterday this came up on our show. What are we doing with Kansas City right now? Have they been replaced in the conversation by the Patriots or the Chargers or someone else? Or are they going to be the Chiefs again? If you know what I mean.
Yeah, it's honestly, it's an open question. Look, I've talked to a lot of people in that building over the last, 4 or 5 months, especially the last few. And I've had more than one person say to me, I actually think we were better in some ways this season than last season, but everything that went wrong, and the year prior to that, everything that went right it just went right. It worked out. But I think the overarching point in that building was, we have really not been very good for the last 2 years. And we were able to get to a Super Bowl based on just guile and a little luck and playing big in big spots. But that's not a winning strategy for a long period of time. And I think their thought is, listen, I say this hesitantly because you don't know how this is all going to shake. They have reason, they have optimism that Mahomes will be back and he'll be able to play a full season next year. But I also think they would tell you, privately, look, this is not going to be a one-year fix. I think they feel like they can contend next year as long as Mahomes is right, because they feel like they got the 9th pick in the draft. They're going to clear a lot of cap space because they can restructure him, and they have a bunch of really easy cuts for a lot of money. I would expect that they'll revamp the running back room. They'll add some edge help. But I think they feel like, look, 2026, could they get back to a Super Bowl and be them? Yeah. But it's probably going to be 2 years before they really have the full-fledged roster that they want. And so I guess I would say, do I think they'll be a contender next year and bounce back? I think they'll be a playoff team again next year, and I think they'll be a threat. I don't think they're just instantly going to go from 6-11 to just right back to being what they've been with, 14-3. They're clearly the best team. I think they'll be in the mix. I would put it that way, but I don't think they're just going to be clearing away the team that you're going into January saying that's the best team in football.
I don't remember why it came up yesterday on our show, Matt, but we were talking about Travis Kelce for a few minutes, and how's the wind blowing on his future? Do you know?
I think more people than not think he's going to come back, which is funny because I don't know that was the case at the very end of the season. I will tell you this. He and Mahomes love Eric Bieniemy. Love him. And I think there's a reason that Eric Bieniemy's back in Kansas City. And it's not Kelce, but it's, the last 3 years offensively, they have trended down each of the years. And I think there's a frustration inside the building because they're looking at it going, the offensive line is legitimately quite good. They have Rashee Rice, look, his off-field concerns aside, is a good football player. They drafted Xavier Worthy, who is not the perfect player, but is a good, useful football player. And yet the offense is stuck in the mud. Now, part of that, I think, is on Andy Reid. He's got to figure out some updates to his scheme. But I think a lot of frustration came down on Matt Nagy and this idea that, look, they are not holding these players accountable. They make the same mistakes every single week. Nothing changes. And there's a reason that, Patrick Mahomes, about a week before they hired Bieniemy, had a press conference and said, we need accountability about 6 times in that press conference. And Eric Bieniemy is the definition of accountability. So I think that I think will help with bringing back Kelce. And I think it's going to kind of help them get back to where they were, provided they can fix up that running back room, stuff like that.
What do you see for Baltimore here? That's the other power, traditional power here that was obviously down. Coaching change, so it seems like they've obviously chosen Lamar, and I would expect them to figure that out contractually. But do you think they'll bounce right back with a new coach?
They're a little more interesting from this standpoint. Like with Kansas City, I look at it and say, if Mahomes gets healthy and he's right, they have a little better luck and they fix a few rooms, they'll be right back in the mix, divisional round on. Baltimore, the hesitancy I have with the Ravens is just, look, that team is old in some spots. Henry is 32 years old. He's still awesome, but he's 32 years old. He's got a ton of mileage on him. And the thing that scares you with Lamar, 3 of the last 5 years, he has had lower body injuries that have taken him out of action for a long period of time. And if you go and look, he's 29 this year, so this doesn't apply to him yet. But the quarterback position, 30 and older, the most rushing yards a quarterback has ever had once they turn 30, Michael Vick, 676 yards. Like, it's just the legs aren't what they once were. And so I wonder with them, Zay Flowers is terrific. They have no other weapon that scares you in the pass game, like zero. And so, they hired a defensive-minded coach. They're bringing in a very young assistant offensive coordinator, Declan Doyle. Like, what do they look like? I think that team is better, but I think they have more questions to answer. Tyler Linderbaum's a free agent. He's a huge piece of that. Is Matabike going to come back from the neck injury? They have to figure some things out that I think are more overarching questions maybe than what's in Kansas City, which I think was more just a kind of a calamity of the year.
Josh Allen will be 30 in May. He and his 79 career rushing touchdowns, which is insane for a quarterback, the most ever for any quarterback. There's different kinds of frustration, Matt, for an NFL team in their season. What Kansas City had, at least it was kind of a quick death. By the time you got to Thanksgiving, it was pretty much over. Here, it's another what could have been season. Losing to Denver in overtime, having the ball in overtime, chance to win, couple of throws, a weird call, Allen's foot. I mean, we never get out of this, out from under this cloud where these little details that do the Bills in. Now a coaching change. What are they for you going into next year?
So for me going into 2026, I think as we sit, and look, we can talk again after free agency draft, whatever. But right now, I think if you lined everybody up and said, who do you think? I mean, the Bills right now, I would pick to get to the Super Bowl. I mean, I think they have the least questions, right? Like we just talked about Kansas City, we talked about Baltimore, and I look at the rest of that conference, and with all due respect to Denver, New England, like I would still, I know this sounds nuts, I would take Kansas City and Baltimore over New England and Denver like tonight, as long as Mahomes is healthy and Jackson can play 17 games. I just think this last year was a weird year. But with Buffalo, you're right. I mean, I don't think there's anybody in the league who's got more frustration right now. Baltimore, it was a weird year. It was a down year. And it ultimately ends up in Harbaugh being gone. Kansas City is a year where they stunk. But they can sit there with a fistful of rings and say, okay, fine, it was one bad year.
Right.
For the Bills, there is look, I was not surprised, like it seems somewhere nationally, at the emotion from that Denver game afterward, where it's just like, what do we have to do? Mm-hmm. What are we ever going to do? And I think, look, I don't blame them for firing McDermott. I will say this. The one thing that makes me a little uneasy about Buffalo right now, it feels like they walked out of that game and the lesson was, this is all Sean McDermott's fault. Hey, we're gonna promote Brandon Beane, and we're gonna promote Joe Brady. And Sean McDermott, he's the guy. It's his fault. Well, if they're right, okay then. But if they're not right, then what? Like that's the thing. Look, they're not going to be super active in free agency, but I would say they don't need to be. They need to have a good draft. They've got to figure out. They got to find some other weapon on the outside. And then defensively, one thing that's eluded the Bills for years, and I've always pointed this when they've lost in playoff games, who is the big pass rusher on the team? Who is the guy, in the 90s you looked at them and, oh my God, they have Bruce Smith. Okay, you don't need Bruce Smith, but can they find a guy who's good for 12 sacks? Like, who's that guy? Is that guy in this draft? Is he the one signing they make, like a big signing? I still think the Bills right now, you're sitting pretty in the AFC, but those are the things that if you're looking forward, what could trip them up? Like, those are the things I think they need to find.
You don't need Bruce Smith, but you might like Chris Jones, somebody that's just, it really is like these, like how you put it, Matt. I mean, these few plays, that's a pass rush. I mean, Chris Jones against the Bills in the game here in the playoffs a couple of years ago,
yeah,
when they needed a play, and actually even the next year, right? I mean, that was more that blitz that messed up the Bills' play, but just like also a pass catcher, somebody that you can really trust in those moments. Free agency is next, and then the draft. If maybe we just limit this to receivers because we're always obsessing over the receiver position here, or just even more broadly, Matt, what kind of year is it going to be?
Well, this is a fun class, I think, for the draft because you look at the draft and, there's not that, like, group of quarterbacks. And I think, erroneously a lot of times we all sit here and look at the class and we base it off the quarterback. Oh, there's 5 first-round quarterbacks. Mendoza's going to probably go number 1. Beyond that, who knows? Maybe one other quarterback goes in the first round. This is a very good class for edge rushers. It is a very good class for defensive backs. It is an excellent receiver class. And if you're a Bills fan, you're pretty happy about all those things, right? Like, those are things you need. And so if I'm the Bills, okay, you're not going to get Carnell Tate, but maybe could you get a Denzel Boston in the first round? Could a guy like a Jordan Tyson slip to them? I think he's an interesting guy because he's got a little bit of an injury history, but he's super talented. There are going to be guys there, second rounders as well. I think there might be 8 receivers or so that go in the first 50, 55 picks. So, if you're Buffalo, that's something that I'm looking at. Like, and I know there are people out there who go, well, you just took Keon Coleman. Who cares? Yeah. You got to get the right guy. Right. Like, you can't just worry about, they made one mistake. Fine. So what? Everybody makes mistakes. You got to go out and find the guy. And I think if you're Buffalo, to your point, about making plays in a moment here, a moment there, I think that's what being a champion a lot of times is about. Allen, to his credit, over the years, yeah, sure, he's had moments you don't have back like the Denver game, but he's made a lot of huge plays in big games. And I look at, the teams that have won recently. You look at Philadelphia. Well, they've got A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, and Saquon, all these defensive players that they've had. Kansas City, when they've had a 3rd and 8, it's no secret who they're going to. Everybody in the world knows who they're going to. It doesn't matter because he's great. It makes no difference. He's just going to get open. Buffalo, for a little while there had Diggs. I think they would be well served above all other needs to go out and say, hey, look, we need to find a guy who can close on defense and a guy who in the biggest spot, we're not, with all due respect to him, he played well down the stretch, but we're not going to Brandon Cooks in the biggest spot in the game.
Right.
Like, we have somebody who we know this guy's winning one-on-one, and Allen's going to put it on him, and good luck stopping him. So if they could get a guy, like a Boston or somebody like that in the first round, I think that's a pretty good win for the Bills. Makes
sense to me. Matt, always good to talk to you. Looks like from your pin tweet, you're doing 5 or 6 shows a week?
Yeah. So it's, busy just on the Patreon show, which is, NFL Wide. And then, just doing all kinds of stuff for Sports Illustrated. So keep me busy, but it's been a blast.
You've given us a lot of your time. Anything we can do for you, let us know.
I appreciate that. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Matt. Matt Verderame at Matt Verderame, Verderame.